back to the page, guys. I hope you're all well. So today in the workshop behind me on the ramp, you'll see we've got a customer's A-Class Mercedes. Now this Mercedes is in with me with a suspected seized engine, as when you try and start the car off the button, it doesn't want to turn over. So the way we're going to work that out is, first off, we're going to try and turn the engine over manually by hand. Now one of two things is going to happen. Either the engine's going to turn over and that will tell me that there is something else stopping this Mercedes from starting, and number two, it won't turn over, so the engine is seized up for one reason or another, and we are more than likely going to be getting the engine replaced. So let's not waste any more time, let's just get it up into the air and let's get it checked out. So now that we've checked out the Merc and we do know that the engine is locked up solid, as you've seen in the video, we've got a breaker bar on that crank pulley and it will not turn over. So you'll be able to see on the screen now that the customer has supplied me a replacement engine to go into this. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing now. I'm going to get the engine pulled out of this and I can get that engine put into its place. Sniff test. Smells like diesel. So on the ramp behind me, you'll see the Mercedes A-Class that we've seen in a previous video where I was showing and explaining that it was in for a replacement engine due to the fact that this one was seized up. Now, since then, obviously, I have started to strip the car down, and the first thing I always do when I'm replacing an engine is drain all the fluids. So I began by draining the oil and the coolant, and when I was draining the oil, that was when we found something quite concerning. So like I said at the start of the video, the first thing I like to do when I'm removing an engine from a car is to drain the oil from the sump. Now, to do it on this Mercedes, although it is a Mercedes, it is a 1.5 DCI Renault engine, but either way, we've got a 8mm square drive sump plug just there. You undo that and the oil will drain out. Now, you'll be able to see in the next clip, when I undone that sump plug, exactly what happened. Oh shit. Still going. So as you've just seen in that clip, I was draining the sump of its contents. Now I was expecting engine oil, but what I wasn't expecting was 1, the amount of fluid, 2, for it to be coming out so fast, and 3, for it to be coming out so thin. Now after checking that fluid, it turns out it wasn't just engine oil we drained from this sump. It turns out we have drained out about 10 or 15 litres of diesel. Sniff test. Smells like diesel. Now, there's only a few ways really that diesel can get into the sump, and number one is the fuel pump seals have gone completely and it is just dumping fuel straight into the crankcase, or number two, there's been an injector failure somewhere along the line and it has damaged a piston or a bore or something in that area, and the fuel is coming out the injector, leaking straight down the cylinder, and again, it is going straight into the sump. Either way, it's not good news, and either way, we are still going to be getting this engine replaced, but what it has got me thinking is maybe, just maybe, this engine wasn't actually mechanically seized, maybe this engine was hydrolocked. Now, for those of you who don't know what hydrolocking is basically when water gets into the cylinder, the piston will rise, and obviously water cannot compress, so it will become solid, and once that piston compresses that water and it becomes solid, the piston's got nowhere to go, so the engine will lock solid. And if you're really unlucky, you will either bend a conrod or you will throw that conrod straight out the side of the block. So what I'm now going to do is, now that we have drained the sump of all of that fluid, it's got me thinking maybe, again, just maybe, this engine will turn over. So I'm going to grab the breaker bar and we're going to try and see if we can spin this engine over. When we were turning the engine over, or when we were trying to turn the engine over, you'd probably seen, if you've seen the last video, if not, you'll be able to see that it was completely locked solid. Now, 18mm socket on a breaker bar, on that crank bolt just there, fingers crossed, this should now spin. And lo and behold, it does, and it feels like we have got some form of compression. Yep, there we go. Pretty much a complete revolution. Now, if you're anything like me, it is always nice to know what the reason is as to why you are removing an engine. So by pure accident, we kind of found out what was wrong with this original engine, and it wasn't locked up mechanically, it was hydrolocked. Now, it doesn't change the fact that I am still going to be taking the engine out of this, as we're not going to take the risk on there being a damaged piston or anything like that, and the fact that we've already got another one sitting, waiting, ready to go in. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. I'm going to carry on by removing the rest of this engine. Welcome back to the page, guys. I hope you're all well. So the last time you'd have seen this Mercedes on the ramp behind me, you'd have seen that it came into the workshop with a suspected seized engine. Now, for those that haven't seen the previous video, on the screen now, you'll be able to see that I did try and turn the engine over by hand, and unfortunately, it didn't want to budge. And then when it came to drain the oil out of the sump, I undone the sump plug, and not only did we drain out the oil, but we also drained out around about 15 to 20 litres, if not more, of diesel. Now, that tells me that there is something seriously wrong with the engine in this Mercedes, and I spoke to the customer. He doesn't want to get involved, he doesn't want to touch it, he wants me to carry on and get the engine replaced. So, that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to get the engine pulled out of the car. We've got to swap over some of the ancillaries, as the replacement engine is missing a few bits. So once we've got all that stripped off the original engine, we can get it onto the replacement one. Once that engine's built back up, we can then get it put back into the car. So like I say, that is exactly what we're going to be doing today, so I'm not going to waste any more time chatting absolute shit. Let's just grab the tools and let's get cracking.
Well, I think we know why this engine was fucked. It's still going. Is there actually any oil in that?
There we go, that's not good. But before we get carried away ripping this thing apart, I am going to show you what bits we need to get off this engine to get swapped over onto the replacement one. So to begin with, we're going to take off the auxiliary belt, as we need the alternator, the air conditioning pump along with the pipe work. Then we also need the charge loom, which we've got just here. Now we will have to take this end off the alternator before we can get that off, but the other end, which connects to the starter motor, is tucked up right down there behind the charge cooler. Now some of you may be wondering how I've managed to get the engine out if the wiring is still connected to the starter motor. And if you follow the rest of the loom down, all the way down here, you'll see we've got these connections just there. And if we quickly go over to the car, you'll see that tucked up behind the washer bottle, just up there below the passenger headlight, there is a junction box just up there, and that is what these connections here connect to. And once they're connected, that will send power to the engine. So once we've got all that off, we are going to have to get the coolant pipes off, as on top of the gearbox, just through that gap there, you'll be able to see we've got a bell housing bolt. Now that bell housing bolt is being blocked by these two coolant pipes. So once we've got these pipes out the way, we can unbolt the bell housing and we can get the gearbox off. So once we've got the gearbox off and we've got all the ancillaries off around the front, we can come around the back and turn our attention to this, which is the exhaust. But before we can get that unbolted from the turbo, we do need to make sure that we're not damaging any of these wires here by unbolting this sensor along with undoing that wiring loom plug just there. Then we can get the exhaust unbolted from the turbo here. There will be a couple of brackets on the block that hold it nice and tight to it. Once they're all off, we'll be able to get this thing pulled off as well. So once this is off, we can turn our attention to this, which is the engine mount. We've got a couple of E-Torx bolts there. We can get it off the crane and then we can get that off. And then we're pretty much ready to get this engine thrown into the bin, get the new one in its place, and we can start building it up with all the ancillaries that we've removed from this engine. So now that we've glossed over that and you know exactly what we're going to be taking from this one to go onto the new one, you know what time it is. It's finally time to grab the tools and let's get cracking. this is the replacement engine that we're going to be getting fitted into the Mercedes. Now, before we can get this fitted into there, we do need to get this built back up with all the parts we have just stripped off. Now, for those that didn't see earlier on, this is the damage to the charge cooler that we've got there. So we are going to be replacing this with the one that we have just removed. Now, I am expecting this to be full of diesel. So if we quickly just, yep, there we go. That's not good. So we'll be getting that cleaned out before we get that refitted. We've also got to get back on the air conditioning pump, the alternator, coolant pipes, gearbox loom. We've got the charge loom just there as well. We've got some brackets here. Like I say, we've got the gearbox. We've got over here the exhaust. We've got the coolant reservoir. We've got intake pipes. We've got a heat exchanger. We've got brackets. There's a fair few bits to be getting put onto this engine before we can get it fitted. Now, before we do get it fitted as well, one thing we are going to be replacing is this. Now, that, for those that aren't aware, that is the cam belt. Now, again, it's hard to say whether it's going to snap or not, but while it's out and we've got this kind of access, for peace of mind, we're going to be getting this belt replaced along with the water pump, which I believe sits somewhere down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this video down into another section. So in the next video, what you'll see is we'll be getting everything built back up, we'll be getting the cam belt replaced, and then we'll be getting this engine put back into there.
1 day later.
So in the last video on this Mercedes, you'd have seen that we got the engine pulled out and we stripped off a load of ancillary parts, as this engine here in front of me that the customer has supplied was missing quite a fair few of them bits. Now, I also explained in the last video that before we get the engine back into the car, or before we get it built back up and back into the car, we are going to be replacing the cam belt and the water pump kit, as we've got no history as to when it was last changed, and it's good practice and it makes a bit of sense to do it now while it's out the car than risk putting it back in and it potentially causing some serious damage. Now, we did have a bit of a headache with getting the cam belt kit, but you'll see what happened with that later on in the video. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the camera, as we're going to start by changing the cam belt, like I say, before we get everything else put back on. So I'll come and grab the camera and I'll show you guys exactly what you need to do to get this kit changed. Now, normally, once we've fitted this cover, what we would be fitting next would be the cam belt tensioner. But like I said earlier on in the video, we did have an issue with that new tensioner, and in the next clip, you'll be able to see exactly what that issue is. So inside this box, there should be a complete cam belt kit. And if we get this cardboard out of the way, you'll be able to see that we've got a new belt there, but we are missing the tensioner. Now, inside this bag, we've got the new hardware, as you can see, the bolt and the washer. We've got the little sticker, but like I say, we've got no tensioner whatsoever. So after a quick phone call to the suppliers, they sent out a complete new kit, and what it looks like has happened is someone took the tensioner out and sent what was left back. So now we've got everything we need. You know what's going to come next? Let's get cracking. So that's the cam belt and the water pump replaced, along with a tensioner. Now, we have had a headache with this, as you've already seen in the video, but finally we've got a complete kit which is on the engine. It turns over, we've got no issues, and we know it all times back up. So we're finally able to start building this engine back up again. Now, we do need a piece of the engine mount bracket which bolts to the head just there. You can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 threads for it. Then once we've got that on, we can put the top cam belt cover on. Then once that's on, we can start putting all the ancillaries that we took off the original engine back onto this engine. So let's not waste any more time. Let's just grab some tools and let's get cracking. So there we go, that's the Merc all done and dusted. After having a replacement engine, we fitted a new cam belt and water pump along with various ancillaries to that engine, and as you've just seen, it is now in the car and up and running. Now, like I said earlier on in the video, we did have a small coolant leak to get sorted. Now, luckily, we had the pipe that we needed on the original engine that we pulled out of the car. So after getting that sorted, we then found that the battery was completely dead. It won't hold any charge. And after a quick chat to the customer, he said once he's got the car back, he is going to be getting that battery replaced. And not only is he going to be replacing the main battery that sits in the top right-hand corner of the engine bay, he is going to be replacing the smaller auxiliary battery, which, if I remember right off the top of my head, in this A-Class sits hidden underneath the centre console in the middle of the car. So all that's left for me to do now is, some of you may have noticed that I didn't put the under tray back on while it was on the ramp. So before we get it off and out for a test drive, I'm going to get the under tray refitted. Then I'll take it out on the test drive, make sure we've got no noises, knocks, bangs, leaks, anything of the kind. And once I'm back, so long as I'm happy, I'll be able to give the customer a call and you can finally come and get this Merc collected. So if this is the kind of content you like seeing and you're not already following the page, pretty simple. All you got to do is hit that follow button. If you're already following the page, hit that like button. But for now, it is a wrap, as I've got a couple more things left to do with this, like I've just said. So I will see you lot in the next one. So as always, thanks for watching, thanks for following. You know how it goes. Fucking mint.